May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable to you, O God, who is our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We may not like it, we may deny it, we may resist it, but the reality is things are changing. Our world is changing, the church is changing, and our lives are changing. When we look in the mirror, we know our lives are changing. Sometimes change is welcome. Sometimes it's not. But there are days when change brings loss and the fear of loss. There are days when our life is forever changed and the world is different and nothing is like it used to be. I hear that from people. It's just not like the good old days. It's not the way it was 10 years or 20 years ago. You and I know those days. We could each tell stories about those days. They are stories about the death of a loved one, a diagnosis, a divorce, the business that's failed, the job that was lost, or the job someone can't get. They are stories about the day that you realized the life you were living was not completely the life that you wanted. The day someone confronted you with your addiction. The day you became a parent or grandparent and caregiver to your own parent. Some days you plan on, and some days you don't. They are stories of dreams and hopes, and some have come true, but others haven't. These are the days when the temples of our lives and the world sometimes feel like they're falling. It is not just our individual temples, however. As a church, we are having to face the reality that our church attendance, not just here, but in other churches, is changing too. We map and we see how decline is here and there. Numbers and income are sometimes down. I conducted a funeral for Jean McMullen on Friday, right next door here at the Rockville Chapel, and she was a member here for 36 years, and now she's gone. The temple of our attendance is falling, and sometimes we are dying or changing. For many people, the Presbyterian Church is not the church they remember. It is not like it used to be when they were growing up. Things have changed. For some people, the temples are falling. As a country, the temple of our economic system is not at its best, to say the least. We can no longer count on investments that will grow every year. The job market is unstable. Young men and young women in their 20s, like my son and others, are worried about getting a job because every 100 letters that they send out, maybe 2 respond back. Globally, we read about wars and plagues and famines, and nations have risen against nations, as in our pericope scripture today, kingdoms against kingdoms, even religion against religion, we see over and over again. Security and peace and diplomacy have given way to fear and violence. We see this. Temples seem to be falling everywhere. We all have temples. Some have been given to us. Others we have built for ourselves. Sometimes our temples are people, places, values and beliefs, institutions, dreams. Regardless, our temples are things that we think structure and order our lives, give meaning and identity, provide security and stability. At least we think they do, until our temples fall. In today's gospel, some were speaking about the temple, its beautiful stones and its beautiful gifts, all dedicated to God. It is what structured the Jewish community at that time. It gave their community identity. It gave their community meaning. It was the center of Jewish life. Jesus looks at it and says to the people, "The days will come when not one stone will be left upon another, and it will all be thrown down. Jesus is speaking about more than just the physical temple in Jerusalem. The Jerusalem temple includes every temple that you and I have too. So what do we do on the day that our temple falls? Change has a way of pushing us into the future. Many people will begin looking for signs of the future. You can see people in New York and downtown Fairfield with signs saying the end times are here. I saw one last week by In-N-Out Burger. What will happen now? What do I do? How will I get through this? What does the future entail? We can't predict it. We don't know, as Megan shared with us this morning. We don't know what the future holds. Who helps us through? If we are not careful, we will soon be living in a future we do not yet have. We will be living in a future created out of our heads, but that is not Jesus' response. When Jesus describes things that will happen, he is not asking us to speculate about the future. Jesus is offering signs that call us to be faithful in the present. Jesus is calling us to be faithful in the present. Sometimes after our temples fall, we look for a scapegoat. It happens in our world. We see it. Someone to blame or even demonize. So we blame Muslims for violence in the world and gay people for the conflict within the breakdown of the family, or Democrats and Republicans blame each other, as do conservatives and liberals. We look for someone or a group that does not think, act, or believe like we do. That is not Jesus' response. Some people will simply give up and walk away in despair. They can't see anything left. All is lost and the situation is hopeless, and that is not Jesus' response. Some will become angry, resentful, and fight back, and others will say, this is God's will, or maybe that's even God's punishment. We hear that in some churches around. Many will look for easy answers and quick fixes, something that will prop up the old structures and way of doing things. Again, this is not Jesus' response. Jesus' response, not surprisingly, is the opposite. Be still, be quiet, and do not be led astray. Do not allow your life to be controlled or determined by fear. Do not listen to the many voices that could cause you to run. Endure, Jesus says. Be faithful, be steadfast, persevere here and now. And sometimes each day we wake up and we feel good and we want to get out of bed. That's a good day. That's the here and now. Jesus is calling us to be present and faithful in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. And if we can't find God here in our present circumstances, even in the midst of our temple ruins, we will find God nowhere. The place of fallen temples is the place in which God, speaking through the prophet Isaiah, declares, I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. Former things shall not be remembered or come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For what I am about to create, Jerusalem as a joy, and people as a delight. Isaiah says, I will rejoice in Jerusalem and delight in my people. No more shall the sound of weeping be heard or the cry of distress. Isaiah 65. These promises are fulfilled by our endurance. By endurance, we gain our lives and our souls through Christ. But Jesus is calling us to the virtue of stability. We are to remain fully present and fully faithful, no matter how uncomfortable life may be. And in doing so, we discover that God has always been with us in the changes and chances and chaos of life, in the pain and the loss and the disappointment, in the destruction of our temples as we know them. Endurance and perseverance and stability are the ways in which we offer God the fallen stones of our temples. Stone by stone, God rebuilds our lives. Stone by stone, God restores the original beauty of our life and world. Stone by stone, a new temple arises from the rubble. Stone by stone, we become the temple of God in the present, one moment at a time. We no longer, though, have temples. We no longer then will need them. We are the temple. That is the story that needs to be told. That is our opportunity to testify. We are the temple. We can all tell the story of the day our temple was destroyed. Too often, however, we believe and live as if the end of the story is already here, and we know how it's going to end. It will be if we run away, scapegoat, respond with anger, or try to put it back the way it used to be instead of asking God, what does our future hold? But it does not have to be the end of the story. The greater story is how we discover God next to us in the temple ruins, and how stone by stone God rebuilt what we cannot. It is the ongoing story of God recreating life out of loss and recreating life out of ruin. The day before yesterday on Friday night, Mark and Diana Brigman and Peter and Karen Thor and I served a meal at the Hope Church to the unhoused residents of Fairfield. Did you know homeless folks are no longer called homeless? They're called unhoused, just so you know. It's true. People as old as 78 and as young as 6 stood in those lines as we served a beautiful meal of salad and sweet potato and rice, home-smoked chicken that Peter smoked that day, lots of chicken, garlic bread and cake. Wow, did everybody love the cake. What an honor to not only serve, but sit among people who were so profoundly grateful for a warm, delicious meal. 3 days a week, as many of you know, churches from around Fairfield come and bring a meal to the unhoused. The third Friday of the month, Rockville serves. What a beautiful ministry, one of many, that our church and in this activity other churches are involved in the community. I must be honest, I'm pretty sure that I got more out of the evening than the attendings did. Sitting with Insuk and Garnet, two wonderful older women, while we were eating, listening to their stories of how they once worked and had a job, but now were unable to find a job, even though they carry around a resume just in case. Their money ran out after they were let go of a job, and now they eat their meals at the Hope Church. Garnet lives in her car along with 2 other people, and Insuk lives on a park bench in Fairfield. Insuk and Garnet count on the dinners that are served at the Hope Church every Monday, Thursday, and Friday as the only food that they eat all week. They talked a bit about the weekends being the most difficult, as they need to go 2 days without eating because no one in the community serves dinners on the weekend. If churches allow them to take an extra portion for the weekend, like we did on Friday night, then they have food for the weekend. But some churches only allow 1 meal per person. If not, then they eat on Friday, and then they eat again on Monday. The stunning part was that neither Insuk nor Garnet were bitter or sad. They were some of the most joyful people that I've met in a very long time. Both spent over an hour recounting stories of how people had brought them blankets or given them food when they least expected it. Both Insuk and Garnet talked about God's faithfulness in the midst of not having any money or anything to offer to others. They talked about counting on God. They talked about counting on God more because they have less. They talked about having jobs at one point. They were let go. So they keep looking. They keep carrying around their resumes. They showed me copies of their resumes. Their love for God, helping others who have even less than they do, is powerful. It was exceptionally powerful for me on Friday. And this is not the end of the story. The greater story is how we discover God next to us in the temple ruins, and how stone by stone God rebuilds what we cannot. The story of Innsbruck and Garnet today, and other stories like ours, are the ongoing story of God recreating life out of loss and ruin. Stone by stone, God rebuilds our temple. Stone by stone, God changes our lives. Stone by stone, God takes what was in ruins, and changes it. Sometimes God teaches us, as we all know, through people we least expect. Innsbruck and Garnet loved the people that were there. I watched them that night. They were saying to me, Pastor, see him over there? He's got this. He needs that. See her over there? She needs that. Friends, we can all do that. Let's take our inspiration today, not only out of our gospel reading, but out and from people like Innsbruck and Garnet, who, yes, are unhoused, but who teach us so much about how to love. Amen.